Thank you. I was getting a little worried. I saw a sheet music here and I thought they were going to expect me to sing. I will not do that. Although I warn you that I'm not just a healthcare executive, I'm also an attorney by training. And so you may be in for quite some lengthy speeches here. But before I began, I saw an elderly gentleman. I gather he had to leave because he was getting very hot. But he had a sign on him and it said, did we have enough of Obama yet? So I ask you, did we have enough of Obama yet? I'm honored to have been asked to participate in this rally today as people here gather in spirit with men and women across the country to fight for one of our most basic of liberties. When it comes to healthcare, though, I probably am the least capable, given all of our distinguished physicians here, to speak about healthcare. I am a lawyer by training. I left the law in 2001 to enter the priesthood. I was accepted into the priesthood for the Archdiocese of Newark. I spent time discerning a vocation in Rome, and after a year I decided that I could serve my church as a layperson. And so I came back to the United States. I was appointed the General Secretary for Administrative and Legal Affairs for the Diocese of Metuchen, New Jersey. And by virtue of that position, I became a trustee of then St. Peter's University Hospital. In 2007, Bishop Bukowski of Metuchen asked me to form St. Peter's healthcare system. And today we have the most comprehensive children's hospital in the state of New Jersey. We have one of the largest adult hospitals in the state. Last year we delivered 6,000 babies, more than any other hospital in the state of New Jersey. And 1,500 of those newborns who are critically ill were treated in our neonatal intensive care unit, which is the largest in the Mid-Atlantic states. I will not go into all of the details, but I can tell you that we recently opened the National Giannis Center for Women's Health and Fertility, and that is run by Dr. Kyle Biter. Kyle, stand up. And the Giannis Center is really something that we discovered in New York City when St. Vincent's was closing, and I went into the city and I said, we must save whatever Catholic-sponsored healthcare programs are left in the city, for there's no other Catholic hospital in New York. And we found the Giannis Center, and it took myself and Bishop Bukowski of Metuchen less than a half hour to decide that we would save it, not only save it and grow it. And today we have people from as far away as Western Pennsylvania calling in for Dr. Biter's services. And we plan to begin a network of Catholic-based family planning and infertility treatment across the country. And recognizing that our responsibilities go beyond the borders of even this country. Over the past 5 years, through the volunteer efforts of our doctors and nurses, we have built clinics in Santa Rosa, Guatemala, where today, because of our efforts, men, women, and children no longer die, even because they have the simplest of diseases. We are part of the oldest and largest provider of health care in the world, the Catholic Church. Amen. From the time the apostles healed the paralytic at the gate in Jerusalem, Christians have cared for the poor, and especially the poor sick. Over 12% of all hospitals in this country are Catholic, admitting over 5 million individuals a year. The Catholic health system in this country alone spends nearly $100 billion providing care, oftentimes to those who cannot afford it. We employ over 1.5 billion professional and other staff. Our services are afforded to everyone, regardless of their sex, their sexual orientation, their race, their creed, their social or economic status. And besides its hospital ministry, the Catholic Church today across this country operates countless nursing homes, ambulatory care clinics, home health, and assisted living programs. Over 65 million Americans a year receive the benefit of Catholic health care. But this afternoon, St. Peter's and her sister faith-based healthcare institutions stand at a crossroads. Our very mission, our very reason for being, is threatened by a federal government for the simple fact that the executive branch of that government does not recognize that anything we do is faith-based. We exist to serve all people in need and allow all who come through our doors to work with us to share in what we consider to be a sacred mission. However, this president and his administration now says that we can only be called faith-based if we care for our own and only hire our own. Yards from here stands the very spot where well over 2 centuries ago, a group of revolutionaries gathered under threat of arrest and death to form a more perfect union. One nation under God with liberty and justice for all. Those revolutionaries became the founding fathers of an experiment in liberty that has withstood the test of all time. Their experiment was imperfect, yet over the centuries has become the last best hope for democracy in our world. 223 years to this day, James Madison, one of those founding fathers, introduced in Congress the Bill of Rights, seeking to make clear that the new nation and its individual states did not infringe upon the most basic rights of men and women, including the right to practice one's religion. Many have fought and died to preserve and promote those rights at home and in lands far away from here. 2 blocks from here, in that direction, is Washington Square, a National Historic Site. The park was the burial ground for scores of Washington's soldiers slaughtered by the British. The tomb of an unknown soldier graces those grounds. During the 18th century, the park was also the burial place for black slaves and other so-called outcasts from society. That hallowed ground is a living memorial to the historic struggles of those who fought for independence at this nation's birth and the ongoing struggles of those disenfranchised who for well over most of our country's history fought to gain independence and acceptance for themselves. Washington Square is a stark lesson that even in a self-proclaimed democratic society such as ours, we collectively as a people have had to continue to fight for freedom so that all citizens may enjoy the promises of liberty and equality. And yet today, we are forced to gather here along with brothers and sisters all across this country, not to fight for a newfound freedom, but to preserve a most basic fundamental right of men and women everywhere, the right to practice their faith as they choose, and to publicly promote that faith in the healthcare and educational institutions their religious congregations built and still maintain. If we lose at this noble effort, we will find ourselves at a dangerous place in our national experience. For one or a few, to lose a most basic right is a threat to all the freedoms we enjoy as a pluralistic people. Now some will say, what does religion have to do with healthcare? Well, consider what is a hospital. Hospitals are an integral part of everyone's life. They are where life begins, where life's greatest physical and psychological challenges are confronted, where the God-given talents of men and women are put to use each day for the advancement of medicine and the sustenance of life, and where life ultimately meets its inevitable end. In this sense, the healthcare setting, whether it is a hospital or an outpatient facility, provides all who work there with this extraordinary opportunity to carry out God's mandate that we care for our brothers and sisters who suffer physically or mentally. In this sense, too, for people of the Christian faith, the healthcare setting in a perfect form can become a living testament to a sacred ministry. A ministry of healing Christ began when he walked the earth over 2,000 years ago, curing the stranger in need, a ministry that can be a sacred experience to both the patient and the caregiver. Many times I receive letters from individuals who have come to St. Peter's, and what they thought would be a frenetic, disorienting experience, they tell me was a very calming experience. For them, they felt that in no small way, they had seen God in the work of the caregiver. And I believe this stems from the institutional adoption of certain basic tenets of human existence, that God is the giver of life, and therefore all life, however fragile, however physically or mentally challenged, is precious. That God gives mankind intelligence that at times manifests itself in medical and scientific advances, but because medicine and science are human endeavors, they are imperfect and subject to failure. But that God, through the example of His Son, teaches and encourages us to show love to the stranger in need. Blessed John Paul II once noted that in the parable of the Good Samaritan, we realize that the Good Samaritan was called to help and to love a stranger in need because that Levite had seen a suffering. And he says, in essence, that one of the greatest vocations that comes from the parable of the Good Samaritan is that of the doctor and the nurse who care for the stranger in need. And therefore we at St. Peter's do not see us simply as performing a job, but rather living a vocation that is based in the gospel itself. Vatican II described every aspect of our church as a sacrament, a sign and an instrument of our union with our God. One church leader has explained that insofar as healthcare ministry is an expression of this broadly sacramental character of the church, Catholic hospitals should be signs and instruments of union with God, affected by service of the sick, witness given to gospel truth, and worship offered in prayer and pastoral care. And I repeat, witness given to gospel truth. For this reason, St. Peter's has never lost sight of its mission to care for the poor sick, as outlined in its centuries-old Articles of Incorporation, and it abides by the calling to care for the most vulnerable among us, the overriding tenet of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops' Directive for Healthcare Services. These principles again find their roots in the gospel. St. Peter's reason for being and for continuing to exist is to reach out to and to care for men, women, and children regardless of their color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, or economic or social status, and in the process allow those who come through our doors for care the opportunity to experience the caring touch of God on earth. We show compassion for the unborn and the dying because we subscribe to the notion that all God-given life from conception onward is precious. Our Roman Catholic faith calls us to move beyond the secular conventional notion of healthcare that all we do is science without connection to providence, and that only some life is worth saving. A few years ago, when I began this job, I was called into our oncology unit by my general counsel, who is of the Jewish faith. She had tears in her eyes, and she told me that she wanted me to be a witness to a wedding. It was the wedding of someone who was in our unit for only a few days, a 35-year-old woman who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. She was weeks away from marrying her loved one, her high school boyfriend. And so my staff bought flowers, hired a rabbi, brought together a congregation, and in our healing garden of our oncology unit, she was married, only a few days before she died. Her stepmother, who I had come to know very, very well, was a reporter for a Florida newspaper. And she wrote about how she had found, along with her Jewish family, God in a Catholic hospital named St. Peter's. And she spoke about how not only did they find God because of the care they got, but it was also the fact that they had found God because of the people they had met. And I will be almost done, I know. She said, but I need to share this with you. She said that by the end of the week at St. Peter's, I realized that I had been looking in all the wrong places for God. Unlike corporate bigwigs ensconced in unreachable ivory towers, I finally learned that God wasn't confining himself to looking down from heaven, but rather was out and about with mankind, acting through the blessed individuals I met at that hospital. The wife learned this through the kindness and compassion of those working on that oncology floor. And she goes on to talk about the faces of the people she had seen. But what she made very clear in her article was that at St. Peter's she learned that God was not confined to a house of worship. This is, in a sense, why the proposed HHS regulation and its compromise turn our back on the very nature of Catholic healthcare. The regulation and the compromise ignore that we are called by our church, as we have for over a century, to care for all. And I know I'm almost done. And the President's compromise is no compromise at all. Because unless I shut my doors to the sick who are not Catholic, unless I fire those who work for me and provide professional services who are not Catholic, I do not meet the definition of a faith-based institution. And I ask, if I am forced to close my doors, along with my sister healthcare institutions across this country, who will take up the burden of caring for the sick, particularly those who cannot afford medical care? I know many of you, in closing, I like to say, I know many of you ascribe to the notion that the introduction of the HHS mandate is an affront on the Catholic Church, an intentional affront on the Catholic Church. Well, that's not so hard to understand. Over the past few years, the political environment in our country has become utterly divided. Collegiality in Washington is gone, discourse has turned to rhetoric, and reaching across the aisle seems now to be forbidden. One pluralistic nation, ours, now finds itself ever increasingly divided by class warfare and now differences in religious convictions, because some men and women in power see division as a path to winning re-election. Yeah. People of conviction have now become pawns in the power play of a few, and that is a tragic consequence of no leadership. I would like to believe that the unprecedented attack on religious liberty we protest is the result of ignorance. And if the President and the Vice President and their advisors were standing here by our side today, I would say to them, you cannot know what you do not know. You do not see, as the Florida newspaper columnist and stepmother of our oncology patient did, that God is not fettered by the confines of a house of worship. You do not appreciate the sacramental ministry of Catholic healthcare. You do not understand that what we do each day at St. Peter's, 24 hours a day, is a part of a ministry Christ himself taught us and charged us to continue. You do not recognize that the healthcare services we deliver and how we choose to deliver them are part of the evangelization called for in the New Testament. For when he sent his disciples out into the world, Jesus said to them, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, but while you go, proclaim the good news that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Yeah. I therefore ask those who are advancing this regulation to come to St. Peter's. See what we do there. Speak to the people of all faiths or no faith who work there and who are cared there, and they simply will tell you not to block the sacred journey that is St. Peter's. Mr. President, listen to what we say here today. As a former Truman Scholar and student of politics, I well know by the very oath you took upon entering office that you swore to uphold the Constitution and protect and defend the most basic rights of Americans. Yeah. As a healthcare executive, In the Catholic Church, I swore to preserve and advance the sacred healing ministry of the Catholic Church. And now my ability to fulfill that promise and thus practice my religion is threatened by the power of the federal government. 2 years after he introduced the Bill of Rights before Congress, James Madison wrote, "Elsewhere in the world, charters of liberty have been granted by power. America has set the example of charters of power granted by liberty. The power you hold, Mr. President, derives from the liberties granted to all of us by one greater than any one of us. Do not use that power to destroy our most basic liberty. Without personal animosity towards you, Mr. President, I respectfully say, tear up your regulation and allow me to practice my faith."
Yeah!